I've recently been thinking it's about time I slow down my sword acquisitions a little because, well, the video backlog is getting massive and I don't even know where to store a lot of them. But as things go in these situations, as soon as you make a decision in one direction, you end up coming by the proverbial offer you can't refuse. And this isn't even the whole of them. There are three more I can't keep in my hand at the moment. So I was very lucky enough to be able to pick up a batch of mostly Indian or Indian adjacent swords, with an exception of one Nimcha. They are, as you can see, in extremely rough shape, which for me is actually a plus because I enjoy the cleaning process as well. Mixed shape, I would say, actually. Some are rougher than others. Some are damaged too, so there's some damage to the hilts, there's some blade bending in quite a few cases. But it was, yeah, as I just said, it was an offer I couldn't refuse. And I'm very happy to have these to clean up and hopefully restore to a more dignified look. So what we're going to do today is kind of a triage of them. I ordered some Renaissance Decorroder, which I want to use. It's, I suppose, a kind of chelation agent, but it's not a pre-made recipe, so you kind of just have this liquid and you dip. It's a little kind of like Evaporust, I suppose, more maybe museum-friendly kind of product. So some of these swords are definitely going to be dipped into the Decorroder. Others, we might use the usual approach for this channel, which is autosol and a bunch of polishing. And for others, we may try some chelation. There's enough of them that we can kind of, I think, try a few different methods. So anyway, what we're going to do today is look at them up close, give a quick description of what they are or could be, just look at the general intake condition, and then I'll suggest what I think I'm going to do with each one of the sword, what cleaning process I'm going to take. But of course, the comments are open for suggestions and tips or ideas, so feel free to get creative. And unfortunately, as I moved to the close-up for this video and for a few of the other ones that are going to be upcoming, about these swords, this batch of swords, I had some technical problems in the recording of the audio. So a few of these videos that are going to be coming out about this batch here, unfortunately, are going to be voiced over as I am doing now. You'll see that there's a bunch of different ones. Most of them you may recognize as Tulwars, so we have quite a few of them with the typical disc pommel. Yeah, some of them with a knuckle guard, some of them without. And then here we have a Nimcha on the far right of the video here. This one is in rather bad shape, so you can see the grip probably is it looks almost like marble or something. It's really dry and really rough. We'll start looking at these swords in detail now, from right to left. And I think what makes me really excited about this, being able to have a batch of swords in a relatively homogeneous kind of rough shape here, is that, as I mentioned in the intro, we'll be able to apply different cleaning methods and hopefully be able to compare. It's not going to be a fully scientific approach, of course, because each sword is different and each one has different damage to it or different conditions of preservation. But I think it's as close as we can get in terms of using comparing cleaning processes on antique swords. So anyway, I'm very excited. But we'll start by looking at the Nimcha. So the first thing that pops out here is the very rough condition, I think, of the hilt. The hilt is horn. You'll also see, by the way, it's missing its knuckle guard here. So normally a Nimcha would have a knuckle guard, but you see it's broken here at a very precise angle too. So yeah, this makes me think that perhaps it was either cut off purposely, or after it broke, whoever owned it decided to kind of file it to make it look a little more decent. In any case, something has been done there to make it look a little better than a random break. But it would have had its knuckle guard there. A ferrule is also missing. You can see the little step there under the hilt. And here's where we see a lot of the real damage. You'll see the horn has shrunk and dried, so you really see a lot of gaps in there, a lot of delamination and cracks. You even see an interesting way the tang is fixed to the blade, so it's basically just kind of bent over the edge of the grip here. This may be something that was done later on, but it's not inconsistent with historical ways of fixing the blade in place. So it's very well possible that this was a bit of a more munitions grade Nimcha, so to speak, or that it was adapted really quickly to its hilt, and that's the way it is. However, as you can see, the hilt is really, really loose there. The grip, both the grip and the hilt are kind of really wobbly. This is a little concerning because it means the tang is very exposed to the elements, and it may be rusting underneath or have rusted. And this kind of causes a little bit of a dilemma because there's no way to remove that grip non-destructively to kind of clean up the tang. Other than that, we have the typical hilt you would imagine on a Nimcha, and we have a rather interesting blade here. We have 3 fullers. They're very tidy and parallel, and they run kind of well, the top one there runs to about the 4/5 of the blade where there's a false edge, and the others run a little further on. But they're kind of really regular, and they're not, let's say, a homebrew fuller like you would see in some locally made like cascaras or tacubas. So this makes me think perhaps this may be export European blade, or a very well-made local blade, but it feels very nice in the hand. I don't see any markings here, but it's possible that there may be something underneath the hilt structure there, especially if it was not designed for that hilt. In terms of rust, there's a lot of active rust, but it doesn't feel to be too deep. We can now move to the next one, which is this Tulwar. You'll see this one is one of the versions with a knuckle bow, which is quite nice to see. There's some kind of pattern there on the hilt, so it could be that we will be able to uncover some kind of decoration there. A lot of Tulwar hilts are richly decorated, sometimes with like silver inlays and this kind of stuff. I don't know that we will find that on this one, but there does seem to be some decoration there. You'll see also the langets here are a little bit fancy. They have like this tri-lobe kind of shape. I'm not experienced enough in this style of weapon that I would be able to understand, to figure out what that says in terms of style or age of this specific hilt. But you may have also seen now that the hilt is very wobbly, like the blade is really wobbly in the hilt. So Tulwars aren't pinned in place. They're held in place by like gauze or fabric wrapped in or filled with pitch. So that's probably dried out by now. If we look here, we see the disc. The disc ends with a very nice pommel and it's not like the super flat disc you see on some of these Tulwars. The blade, we can take a look at it now. It's in pretty rough shape. And you'll also see it's been mounted incorrectly. So perhaps the reason why this blade is so wobbly is that it's not fixed in place. You'll see that the curve is actually running along the side where the knuckle guard is, so almost in a yatagan style, you could say. But that's not the sharp side of the blade, so it's simply been re-hilted or kind of stuck into the hilt there at some point incorrectly. So this is good news though that it's so wobbly, because it means that it should be fairly easy to remove it, clean it, and then be able to re-hilt it in its correct position. In any case, this blade seems to me to be pretty healthy looking, apart from, let's say, the obvious corrosion and aging, but it doesn't feel like there's, some kind of extreme pitting or damage to the blade. It's fairly thick and it's fairly straight. So I did mention a few of these blades have some deep bends to them. This one is one of the ones that are in the best shape, so I'm fairly optimistic about this sword being able to be cleaned decently. So, by the way, I didn't mention before, the Nimcha, I plan to use autosol, like the traditional process for it. This one here, with the fact that I can actually remove the blade from the hilt, this may be a good candidate for using like decorroder or a chelation agent, or for a bath. And this is because I can, by separating the blade, I'll be able to just dip it into whatever solution it is without worrying about it seeping kind of into the hilt and potentially damaging the pitch. Here you see it has a false edge, which is quite lovely. The tip is slightly rounded. But overall, it's, I would say, in fairly good shape, given its almost relic condition. Now, moving on to the third blade. This is another Tulwar with a knuckle bow. This one is a little bit different in style, as you can probably see. The langets seem to be longer, they don't have the trilobe shape. It does fit very well in the hand, and the blade is actually very well fitted to the hilt, which to me says that it may not be the best candidate for decorroder, or for, let's say, a full bath, because then the product will probably seep under where the tang is, and I don't know what effect it could have on the pitch, holding everything in place. So here we can compare the two, just to get an idea. You see the differences in the langets, you see differences in the crossguard and the quillins, so to speak. This one here on the left is a little more stout. The other one seems a little more slender. If we look at the curves of the blade, they start out fairly similar, I would say, although you'll see that the one on the right has a steeper curve towards the end of the blade. But we do see a little bit of a difference on the disc here. The disc has like a star shape to it, and it has this little peg poking out of the bottom. As I mentioned, it fits well in the hand, even though it's a rather slender hilt. It fits very well in my hand, which is not necessarily a small hand, so a very comfortable sword to hold. We'll see again, you can see there the leftovers of the, I think, pitch and stuff holding the blade in place. This one is really solid in its hilt. So this is good news and bad, as I mentioned, in terms of the process for cleaning. You'll see it has some areas of heavy rust and staining, so that's not good. But on the other hand, similar to what we've seen on the other blade, I don't feel, at least at this first touch here, I don't feel like heavy corrosion, or I don't feel like some really horrible damage to the metal. There's a nice fuller, pretty deep fuller there that runs up to almost where the false edge starts. The blade is fairly sharp. This one, I think, is a interesting candidate perhaps for a cleaning with autosol and like with the usual traditional method I have. As you can see, this one is also fairly straight. It doesn't have any deep bend, so I think once this one is cleaned, it's going to prove to be a pretty lovely sword. And the reason why I probably want to clean this one with my, let's say, typical approach is that the blade is similar enough to the one we saw previously, and the hilt also is the same type. So it may be interesting to have that kind of comparison between two very similar swords. Now moving towards the fourth sword here, we have this Tulwar without a knuckle bow. You can see the disc there is a little loose. The hilt, however, is well fixed in place. You do see some damage to the langet, it's kind of bent there. But what immediately stands out here are these buttons on the crossguard. These may be brass. They're often like decorative elements, or copper perhaps even. So it's going to be very interesting when we can kind of deoxidize that section and see what happens underneath. Similar to the Tulwar we saw before, the inner ring here also has some decorated edges, but less pointy than the one we saw. These are more rounded, like flower petals. And this one also has a round finial as the first Tulwar we saw today. Now, speaking of bends in the blade, here you'll see what I was talking about. This one has a rather serious bend there at the tip. So many of these swords aren't spring steel, so it might be that it can be bent back into shape fairly easily. And it's in a position that perhaps I would feel comfortable trying to rebend here. It's not the thickest part of the blade, so I'm not too concerned with it warping even more or breaking off completely. Something to be seen. What's interesting here is this fuller design. You may see here, or see under the rust. It has a kind of 2 or 3 parallel fullers, but then there's a perpendicular fuller at some point there at the left, kind of uniting them. So this is an unusual fuller configuration and something that will be interesting to see once it's been cleaned. Speaking of cleaning, this one is like the other ones we saw. You can see it has a lot of staining on it. It seems like, it's definitely seen better days, but I have the feeling that this one also does not have any excessively deeply corroded areas to it. So I have the feeling that this one could be cleaned in both ways. I would also be interested in trying to use decorroder on a blade like this, which is not in very bad shape, to see kind of what the impact. A lot of videos I've seen using like these chelation agents are used on metal that is really, really in bad shape. So perhaps this is going to be an interesting test to see how it works instead on something that is simply very oxidized and stained, but not in horrible shape. Speaking of not in horrible shape, and as you can see, this blade is oxidized, it has some rust, but it's almost, I would say, in very good shape. There's no corrosion that I can really see. But let's focus a second on the hilt here. It has a rather large disc compared to the ones we saw. It doesn't seem to have that inside ring with like the petals and decoration we saw, but it does have that ball finial. It is a rather spacious hilt in the sense that I can hold it very comfortably, which is not always the case with Tulwars. Sometimes they're very snug, a little too snug for my hands. But this one is not the case. This is a very comfortable fit. You'll also see a kind of chevron decoration there on the grip, halfway up the grip there. This, I wonder if it'll show in a better light once it's decorroded and cleaned, but there definitely is some kind of decoration going on there. Although I doubt it's some kind of really rich decoration. The inside of the disc here is very filled with concretion and stuff, but you do see these like round, there must have been something there, like little dots decorating around the disc. And also you'll see on the inner side there, it has some kind of decoration as well. And as I mentioned, the bulbous, the rounded finial to it. The blade feels really, really smooth. So that is very good news because as you can see, there really is not that much rust on it. It's dirty, it's stained, but that's all going to come off with some autosol, and this one is a good candidate for the traditional, well, quote unquote, my traditional way of cleaning. So I don't think we're going to go through chelation for this one. Blade is pretty well fixed into the hilt. There is a slight bend to it, but it's okay. What's interesting about this one is you see this yelman here. So the spine ends with a raised section and this false edge at the end. This looks really beautiful. So I think once this one is cleaned, it's going to be even more striking to see. You even see it has kind of an angle to it. So I think this is going to be really nice once it's cleaned. There, I'm showing you can see that slight bend I was mentioning in the blade. Again, if this isn't spring steel, it might be a good candidate for a attempt to straightening. But honestly, this bend isn't serious enough that it concerns me too much. So I would rather keep the blade complete rather than risk damaging it, especially because of that beautiful yelman. I would really hate it to be damaged. Anyway, moving on to yet another Tulwar. This one, again, is a version without the knuckle guard. This one has a bit of a decorated langet, or langets, actually. The condition is, by now, we've seen a bunch of these, fairly similar to all the others we've seen. In this case, the disc is well fixed in place, little decoration on the disc, and again, a round finial there. It's patinated, it has a lot of aging on it, the blade looks bone dry, but you can also see that, well, there's a bunch of red rust for sure, but it's all possibly superficial, except when we get to this area here. Now here you can feel some corrosion, and you can actually even see how it's differentially aged, so to speak. So the bottom third there, or bottom half of the blade, is fairly good condition. You can almost see the steel shining through. And then as you get here, you see towards the tip, you really see a lot of deep pitting and corrosion. However, the tip is still there. It's rounded but complete. The edge seems to not have crazy damage to it. This one I would, and then we have that narrow fuller at the top near the spine. My feeling is with this one that, well, this could be a candidate for both, honestly, because I think the decorroder would probably work very well at removing all of the residue inside the pits and in the corroded sections of the blade. However, there's also a risk with using that decorroder. Oh, by the way, here we have a bend that I don't think I'll be able to fix because it's on the kind of on a very thick section of the blade. And I'm afraid that if I tried to bend that back in place, I would end up causing another bend somewhere else. So I don't know. I don't know that I would be comfortable rebending, like straightening that out. However, as I was saying, the risk of using the decorroder on this kind of blade or on that section with the corrosion is that, yes, you do remove all of that stuff that's inside, but you make the pitting and corrosion even more visible in a sense. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this one, because on the one hand, yeah, I might be using both actually. I might be doing a pass with the traditional method to get the main rust off and then decorroding it. We'll see. Here we have instead a Nepalese kora. This is a very interesting sword because it actually cuts on the concave edge. So as opposed, yeah, as you can see here, I'm testing it on my hand, but it cuts in that kind of section there. This is used a lot even in animal sacrifices, and I've been told that its blade design, and when it's sharp enough, it can kind of cut off a section of an animal in one blow, basically. Unfortunately, as you can see here, the hilt has seen much, much better days. I don't really think it could see worse days than this. You have these disc guard and a disc kind of pommel there, but you'll see that there's sheet metal that in between would have had probably some wood to give it some strength, but that has long gone, and now the sheet there is all bent. The pommel is really lovely. It's done in like a bit of a conical shape. And the interesting thing about these swords is the blade. It has a very thick spine, and the spine stays thick basically up to the end. And this gives it a lot of weight and a lot of, let's say, authority when being swung. You'll also see that the blade thickens towards the end. So this means that a lot of the weight is actually towards the tip, meaning that in a chopping movement, that is the ideal kind of, a lot of weight is behind the area where you would be hitting something when you're chopping it. In any case, without talking about the blade dynamics, which I'm not fit to do, what this one has that's quite interesting are these decorations. You'll see some inlays there, and you'll also see a bunch of engravings that kind of are especially in the tip section there. The inlays are probably brass, I would imagine, and some of them seem to be missing, and some of them are blackened or darkened there, so it'll be interesting to kind of clean them up and see what emerges, both in terms of the metal used for the inlay, but also in terms of the kind of decorative patterns that are used there. And this may be a good candidate for decorroding, although I'm not sure about the hilt. Now what we're seeing next is perhaps the most rare and most interesting of this batch. This is what could be, or what is by some referred to as a Tibetan kora. And as far as I know, there are very few of these that I have ever seen or that are documented, like a handful maybe. And these have the potential to be quite old swords as well. So pre-18th century, I'm still looking into kind of understanding what this sword may be in terms of its history, but it's definitely, if it is a Tibetan kora, it could be a very antique sword and rare too. You'll see it has the similar shape to the kora we just saw, but the blade, the way it kind of widens is less dramatic to the Nepalese kora. And also one interesting thing is that it's a full metal, it's a one piece of metal basically. It has this really small crossguard, almost kidney or heart shaped, a little like almost like a bollock dagger in a sense. And then it is in one piece connected to the tang there. This would have been covered in wood at some point, but that's long gone. And we have a pommel that again is kind of almost conical in a sense. It's a little stack of circular shaped. And here we see the blade kind of transitions from a almost square section. It flattens out then into what the kora blade is. And then moves up to, like it flares out, let's say, towards the tip. So smaller, thinner, less impressive in terms of its curvature and in terms of how much it widens, and all one piece of metal. Anyway, this isn't a video about the history of the sword. If we look at the condition of the blade, it's really not that bad. There's a bunch of superficial rust, there is some pitting, there is some corrosion, but it's nothing that hasn't been seen before on this channel. And actually, I'm very optimistic because you can really see the steel shining through that dirt and corrosion. So I think this will be a good candidate for possibly both methods of cleaning. I might keep this aside, given it being a rather or potentially rare and really antique sword, and see first how the decorroder and stuff works out on the others before I choose which method to use on this one. So anyway, this was the triage video for the big haul of mostly Indian subcontinent swords. Individual videos for each one of these swords are going to be coming out, and then the comparison ones, hopefully, if I'm able to coordinate everything correctly. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye!